Well, hello everybody. You may remember that long ago in the mythic epic ages past, before Flashpoint came out and I got bogged down with that, before the Heart of Thorns review was coming out and I got bogged down with that, we actually did a super Q&A. This is a big questions and answers session with people who contribute to my Patreon campaign, people I'm incredibly appreciative of, who allow me to live the life that I live. They can ask me any question at all and I'll try to give them a thorough answer. So these are pretty fun videos to do and I want to get them a lot more regular, and then we kind of got bogged down with all that other stuff. So let's jump in. There are still many questions left, some of them fairly old at this point, so let's run on through. I'll give you guys the best answers I possibly can, and we'll open up a new round of questioning very shortly. Here I'll be talking about personal stuff, I'll be talking about Guild Wars stuff, I'll be talking about whatever the hell people are interested in talking about. So starting off with Isengriff McCabbage, who finally gets a response out of me after typing for years, perhaps, Novamus in the comments. He says, 2 questions today. He says, number 1, what are your thoughts on the prospect of the new raid being Thunderhead Keep? And he says, seeing as it was one of the harder missions at the launch of Guild Wars 1, how cool would it be to maintain its legacy and become hard content for Guild Wars 2? And then he seems to have left space to ask a second question here, but then didn't type anything, which is very, very curious. He also edited when Crack in the Eyes came out and said, do you still think it's plausible we could end up in the Delgamore front? So yeah, let's talk about this. I think this is a really, really cool idea, and I do think it's still on the table. So let's sum this up. Season 3 is going to have 6 episodes. Each episode, they said they were going to try and have a map for each one. There are 3 teams. Team 1 did 2 very White Mantle-y based patches. They did Bloodstone Fen, which had tons of White Mantle stuff, and then they did the Crichton map, which had tons of White Mantle stuff, okay? Then we had Team 2, who did 2 maps in the Fire Island chain, and lots of Fire Island chainy stuff. And then we've got Team 3. Team 3 did a map in the Shiver Peaks before, and did story to do with Bram, and may have done the best map, not the biggest map, which is obviously Draconis Mons, but I really like the Crack in the Ice. I really like the Bitter Frost Frontier. Because they did an icy map before, it means the finale could potentially as well be an icy map, right? Like, they may have had Team 3 be like the icy team, right? So I think it's totally appropriate and possible that we will once again be returning to the Shiver Peaks. The question is exactly where. So the story we know right now, if the finale does return to Bram, there's a very exciting idea of Bram is angry at Jormag and he's about to charge loads of people at Jormag. Jormag could have just been sent back to sleep and Bram might be about to mess us all up by waking him up again with all the Norn or something. But Jormag is in the far north. Jormag, you know, is way out there. Jormag is beyond the blizzards, and we know that because if you think about Bitter Frost Frontier, the top right of that map was, you know, supposed to be really dangerous and really deadly, and we couldn't even walk there without the elixir because it was getting closer and closer to Jormag. So the idea then would be maybe this last map, the finale map, is in the Shiver Peaks, but it can't be at the Delgamore front. It's way off in the north. Maybe, guys, and this is a potential for the map, maybe it's going to be a full map version of the Eye of the North. People who have linked their Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2 accounts together will have access, and they have since the launch of the game, to a special map way out in the far Shiver Peaks, which is kind of close to Bitter Frost Frontier. That would be so cool if we got the actual Eye of the North map around the tower and everything. Oh, that would be amazing. I'd love that as a finale map. But that doesn't quite leave room for the Delgamore front. So, yeah, there is this question, how could we go to the Delgamore front? Well, it wouldn't be about Bram then, would it? It would be about the dwarves. I do still like the idea of going to the Delgamore front, and especially Thunderhead Keep. People that don't know, my original content I ever did on Guild Wars was I did a challenge playthrough series of the Prophecies campaign. And the absolute hardest part of my challenge playthrough, which involved doing everything solo, even though at that point I was supposed to be playing with 8 other players, or an 8-player party size, right? One of the hardest points of all of this was Thunderhead Keep, and I'd love to go back there. And it's got the White Mantle ties, which I thought could have been relevant as well, and it's got that portal from the Fire Island chain connecting to it, and we had a dwarf in the Rising Flames patch, and that dwarf even mentioned Thunderheads. But now, especially with the most recent patch, it feels like we're transitioning away from the White Mantle again. We're moving away from that, and we're not looking at all the Bloodstones or whatever. And now it seems a bit weird that maybe Thunderhead is suddenly a lot less likely. We will see. I think I'm equally excited by the idea of going to an Eye of the North style area, as I am excited about going to Thunderhead Keep. And who knows, in 2-3 months, we'll probably have our answer on where that final map really is. Or maybe they'll do something crazy. Maybe this is the one update that won't have a map. That would be kind of sucky for the finale, but we'll see. Moving on, next question is from Domica Clark, who says, this might be a really silly question, but I was really curious how you're liking your Himalayan salt lamp. I've had my eye on them since I saw yours in the video, and I think it looks really sharp. Should I dig deep for one? Yay or nay? Thanks. Okay, so people on YouTube will not understand this, but when I opened my Patreon campaign, it actually enabled me to move out of my parents, and I've got a nice little cozy place now. One of the things I did when I moved in was I tried to, you know, make my desk look really nice and do different things, and I bought like this Himalayan salt lamp. You guys might not know what it is. I'll put a picture on screen for you if you guys care to. And I've had it for quite a while now, obviously. It was about a year ago that I think I got this thing. It's been cool. I lost one of the light bulbs, so the light bulb did burn out, and I don't think you can have it on for too long. And also, practically speaking, it's not very bright at all. It looks cool, and I like it in pictures and stuff, and I like what it does with the desk, but it doesn't actually really illuminate things very well at all. Like, I'd never sit here in the dark, but put the Himalayan salt lamp on. It's more of an ambience thing. It's kind of weirdly useless, and more just an opulent waste of space, really, if anything. But I like it. I do like it. I think it's cool. I think if you like the way that they look in pictures, then you'll like one having actually on your desk, in your house, wherever. It's just, the main thing that struck me about it is, yeah, it really doesn't illuminate very much. It isn't that bright. It just looks cool, and yeah, I use it an awful lot. I like sitting in the dark with it there, because it makes the desk look pretty cool. So there you go. That's my Himalayan salt lamp review. You guys didn't know what you were gonna get when you clicked on this video today, did you? Whoever thought it? All right, moving on. We got Talsalian, who says, "Hey WP, do you think that Guild Wars 2 is hurt at all by its name? I know that may sound weird coming from or to someone who plays the game every day at this point, but I'm trying to think to back before I started playing. This was my first MMO, and while I had probably heard of the game in passing, I never would have considered it had a friend not put it on my radar. To me, the name Guild Wars 2 with no other context implied two things. Guild Wars sounds like a super heavy faction-based game where playing requires coordinating with a guild and adjusting my personal life around a guild schedule, and the two. And I probably figured I had to play the first game to even consider the second. Fortunately, both of these assumptions proved false in the end, and it's a game I can play whenever I want. It's very solo-friendly, and the story/gameplay doesn't seem that reliant on the first game, at least the current Living World. So I guess I'm wondering, do you think the game is missing out on other potential new players who may be making the same assumptions I did based off the name? Might the game actually draw more players if it were named just something like Tyria, so Guild Wars 1 players would still recognize it without alienating players unfamiliar with the game? Dude, that's so weird, because without having read your question until now, a little while back, I was talking on one of my streams about, yeah, I actually think Tyria, in many ways, is a better name for Guild Wars. And it's funny because you've raised this question, you've put some really interesting points forward, and the big one that most people hang up on is this idea that Guild Wars arbitrarily, because of its name, needs to support Guild Wars, right? Like as a content feature, whether it's warranted or not. And if you slap a different label on a GVG-ish format like they did with Stronghold, people will be unflinchingly unwelcoming of it. What they think that the game absolutely needs, completely irregardless almost of anything else, almost based on the semantic argument of the name, is, oh, what's Guild Wars without having Guild Wars? And it's kind of one of these funny choly things that's been hovering around the game. I don't deny it could be something really cool and a nice feature that a lot of players would enjoy, but it feels like that root of it coming from the name all the time is a bit weird, and it doesn't seem to work too much. It seems to suggest a big faction-based PvP thing, just like you say, when really, if this game is doubled down on anything, I think it's doubled down on story components and a lot of RPG and PvE things. You know, the story of how Guild Wars got its name really has its roots in why ArenaNet is called ArenaNet, right? Like, ArenaNet is also a very PvP competitive sounding company. Like, they would be making games like League, for example, right? But they don't, and it's funny how that's kind of warped and changed over the years. It's really fascinating if you want to look back at the development of Guild Wars 1 and to see how it ended up getting this name and how they ended up later on adding this lore justification for what the Guild Wars were. I do think Tyria would be a much better name. Tyria, it's simple, it's short, it's sweet. Not only does Guild Wars 2 sound like a mismatch, not only does the 2 probably drive people away, but also I just think it doesn't sound like a very interesting game, does it? Tyria sounds interesting. It's a question almost. What is Tyria? Where is Tyria? What's Tyria all about? And yes, it's also more representative of the content inside, but I think that would pique people's interest more than something called Guild Wars 2, which just has this weird, like, almost 90s tacky, odd video gamey vibe that I think is a bit off-putting. I really don't. I can absolutely sympathize with people who would think Guild Wars 2 and it's not really on their radar at all. definitely. I do think the game is held back a little bit by its name. And if ArenaNet were to ever do something like a Guild Wars 3, I don't think it would be called Guild Wars 3. I think that they might take the same IP and that they would embellish on the setting, or, you know, set it in a different period of time in Tyrria's history. But it would be much better if they called that sequel Tyria instead of Guild Wars 3, because now you're going even further down the rabbit hole, right? But yeah, it's a great question, and I wonder how people... does anyone remember, before they got into the game, any particularly new players around in the comments, how you felt about the name Guild Wars 2? It just, I don't know, it sits weirdly, doesn't it? Oh, I just had a weird Windows 10 pop up. Thanks very much, Windows 10. Let's move on. Next question is from Eric's84, who says, do you think we'll ever get another Guild Wars novel? And if we did, what would you want it to be about? My favorite period of history, and what I think the novels could be amazing for, would be 20 to 30 years before GW1 starts, when you've got all the interesting stuff going on between the three human factions, and you get to see the rise of people like Adalbern or them as children and so forth. I think that would be really, really cool, and I think there's a lot of very personal, interesting things you could pull out of that. Seeing the relationship between Adalbern and his country, and Adalbern and his son, and seeing how these things get shaken and rocked to the point where the faux fire happens, for example, many years later, which the novel may or may not go into, would be really cool. In fact, the faux fire itself would also be a great period of history to look at. However, would we get a novel? And I do think there's a lot of potential for really great novels. Any universe, any con world like this, that's this vast, has so many different opportunities for different things for people to talk about. But will we get one? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's really in the scope anymore, does it? It doesn't seem like there's anyone that at the company that would champion that and charge forward with that and go with that. Unless they then outsource it to another author who maybe doesn't even care that much about the franchise or the IP, and then it would be a bit of a naff book. I mean, if we end up going in the territory of having expansions taking us to places like Cantha, which are really wild and really different, maybe then it would work to do some novels there. But the original 3 novels they released, and especially Ghost of Ascalon, kind of served a practical purpose as much as they were pandering to fans, right? And that's that it actually got more people into the story and into the lore and into the world. It was like an introduction for people. It was, hey, this book is a cool story, but it will also teach you about the races you'll be able to play as, and it will teach you about the setting. And that's got a real use. Now, you know, we're an established audience, an established game, and maybe the use is a little bit weaker, unless, of course, we're going to an entirely new region of the world, and then, you know, you can have a novel that's got that functional purpose there as well. I would love more novels, for what it's worth. I'm just a bit pessimistic as to see whether we'll get any, but we'll see. Moving on, I've got a lot of questions here from Tim Syriac, who I will give brief answers to, otherwise it will be all video answering this one person. It's probably not very fair. So Tim says, first of all, how long did it take you to get all of the mastery points that are up to date and most of the Heart of Thorns achievements, and what difficulties, challenges did you face? I really couldn't sum up at this point, and I don't think many veteran players or established players could sum up at this point how long it took them to get everything, because a lot of the time I was getting mastery points, not because I was specifically going for mastery points, but just because they came hand in hand with exploration of the expansion. And the expansion came out, you know, around 2 years ago now. I can't really remember anymore, and especially then trying to sum up exactly all the little moments I found mastery points in all the new maps. I don't know, that would be a bit tricky. I will say, though, that the newest map, Draconis Mons, I actually, on my main account, have still not got some of those mastery points. I just don't have them. I just haven't explored that map well enough just yet. And that's the first time I've been in that situation. The first time that they've added mastery points and I just haven't picked them up. I couldn't really pick out any specific difficulties or challenges, except that the adventures, obviously getting gold on some of those at the release of Heart of Thorns, well, it was pretty tricky getting some of those mastery points. Next, he says, since we have legendary weapons, back items, and armor, do you think we might be able to get legendary trinkets? We have the Bloodstone trinkets from Bloodstone Fen that sort of work like a legendary, but you need a special item to be able to switch your stats on your Bloodstone trinkets. Yeah, I think undoubtedly there's space in the engine and the game and the reward design to give us legendary trinkets that have that perk of being stat selectable. That's obvious, really. The thing, though, to me, is in order to justify a legendary trinket coming to the game, it needs to have something more than the stat selecting. Like, in the cosmetic department, it needs to have something cooler about it, and a big part of me wonders what that could be, because now that we've got the auras and stuff like that, it's like that design space that once upon a time could have existed purely for legendary trinkets, like the ghostly infusion, right? If that didn't exist, if nothing like that existed, the queen bee, the chuck egg set, if none of that existed, we could say, all right, yeah, they'll add trinkets, and then it's only the legendary ones that give you these special flavor effects. But now that's kind of been taken up. So what, is it going to be a trinket that somehow appears on your hand or around your neck and clips with your armor in ugly ways? That can't be it. Is it going to be some extra new effect, like the Queen Bee's another interesting one, because it kind of gobbled up some design space again, in that the Queen Bee gives you a fall damage effect. When you die to fall damage, or you take fall damage, you splat honey everywhere. That's really cool. What if legendary trinkets gave you that? But then there's kind of the question of, well, the Queen Bee already does it. Perhaps that's why they've remained that as an exotic thing, by the way, instead of ascended. So there's maybe space, but I think that that's the big answer to the big question to answer. It's cosmetic stuff. Like, what is it that's special about them beyond stat selecting? Because I don't think people will care enough if it's just stat selecting, really. Because again, just like you expand, we've already got something fairly close to that from the new Living World maps. Next question, he says, will we be able to see a seer alive? We have the Massart, why not seers? Is there anything in the lore that says the seers are long gone to the point of non-existence? If not, are there any races or creatures you would want to see it again be put into Guild Wars 2? See, what you just asked me is actually a fascinating question, and I will be very careful here not to ramble about this too much. It's a fascinating question, not just for the seers and Guild Wars 2, but in the real world too, okay? Declaring something extinct and knowing exactly when something becomes extinct is actually a very hard thing to pin down and do, because it's kind of proving a negative, right? It's very challenging. There have been lots of situations in the real world where people have said, oh yeah, there's none of these left, they're extinct, and then, you know, 20, 30 years later, one shows up in someone's garden or something. You're like, oh, there is still a population. It's really hard to nail down that moment that they are long gone. There's nearly always space that something might pop up again, just because Earth is vast and there's so much opportunity. And, you know, you can go out into your back garden and, if you look with the right lens, identify new species of things that people have never really studied before. It's ridiculous. And so that's true of Tyria, and this is too, of course. And that's good for writers, because that gives them that leeway to always say, oh no, here's a seer that's still alive. You thought they were extinct, but here's one. And that's essentially what they did kind of in GW1 right on the onset. I wouldn't be offended to see that in GW2, certainly. And then finally, he says, what attracted you most to get into the Guild Wars franchise to the point that made you wanting to create videos about the game, and what's been going on both lore-wise and community-wise? Well, the reason I got into the franchise was because it was a no-subscription game, and I was young, I was at home, and I was not raised in the kind of household where we had the money or the inclination to spend monthly subscriptions on something like a video game. That was just off the table. And so this was Guild Wars 1 was a buy-to-play MMO, and it was incredibly exciting. And, you know, my previous experience had been mostly free-to-play RuneScape stuff on the MMO market, and I kind of jumped in. That's why I got in originally. When it came to covering it on YouTube, a lot of it was excitement for the second game, and I knew that the second game was going to be something big, and I wanted to share that with the world. I wanted to be able to talk about it, and I saw barely anyone really had it on their radar yet. But number two, I had seen that Guild Wars 1 was amazing and had all this really cool stuff, but the YouTube scene for Guild Wars 1, especially in the area of Let's Plays, which is where I started, was really dire, and no one was really doing anything anymore, and it was kind of passing its heyday. A lot of the old active and some of the big guys that were around in the Guild Wars 1 days had stopped posting, and there really wasn't much going on. And the heyday for Guild Wars 1 YouTube videos, there weren't even many people doing guides and things. There were a couple, and some of them did get pretty big, but mostly it was like AMVs and stuff. No one was really doing the kind of content I enjoyed watching. No one had done a good LP. There had been Let's Plays that were like 40, 50 episodes of people just walking around and pre-searing and doing nothing really, and not really talking into their microphones and just presenting crappy experiences. And I remembered I was working at a supermarket at the time, and I remember thinking, I can do better than that. There's something out there that I think I actually can do. That no one else has done yet. And it was very important to me that I did something no one else had done. No one had paid attention to the story. No one had soloed prophecies. I want to do it. I want to put myself out there. I spent a lot of time on YouTube watching this kind of stuff. I want to create something. And that's how I got in. All right, I spent way too long on that. Thank you very much for the questions. Tim, moving on, we've got Nathaniel Green, who says, thanks for answering my last question on one of the Q&As. He says, I have trouble thinking of one relating to the current happenings in the game, so I'll default to one I've had for a while. Do you think ArenaNet is growing as a company, hiring new people, etc.? Wouldn't more employees equal more content, or at least ArenaNet not having to pull devs away from one project to work on another? For example, from the Legendary Quest system to Living Story? Or do you think that they don't have the revenue to hire new people, nor would it be easy to acclimate them to the ArenaNet family, or some other reason? I think at the end of your question there, you touched on something that's quite interesting, and it's that for a company, for a business, for a game developer to be successful, they don't have to be constantly growing, right? There is such thing as a workplace culture, and there is such thing as going too big too fast and having too much expansion, and there is such a thing as saying, look, we've got 150 people, for example, working here now. This is a nice size. Let's leave it there. Maybe we don't want to go up to a 300-person company where we don't know everyone anymore, and there's, you know, more people there that you don't like than you do like. Maybe you're fine at that level, right? Does ArenaNet have to keep employing new people? But to that, it seems like they are continuing to employ new people. For a long time, 300 was the number, but they did come out, what was it, a month and a half ago, and expressly said there are about 400 people at ArenaNet now, which is another 100 since we'd last been hearing. Another 100 came through the doors around Heart of Thorns, right? So there are another 100 people there. Have they all gone onto this beautiful thing they're now doing where they're getting Living World and expansion development going at once? It does seem like they're making less compromises these days. Has it gone on to that, or are these 100 people now working on another project, another IP, another game? It is funny, Guild Wars 2 is only going to get older and older and older, and if ArenaNet wants to exist at some point, they're going to have to pursue the development of new IPs or new games at least, right? So maybe they brought on another 100 people to do that, and that's going on behind closed doors, and we will hear nothing about it. It will be absolute deathly silence until one day they're actually comfortable with something that they've made. I don't know, I guess that's up for us to speculate, but 100 more people have gone. I don't have to think, is ArenaNet growing? They are growing. They grew by 100. The next question is from Blue Elliot, who says, hey, Spuddy. I always feel weird about that, calling the fans Spuddies. My question to you is simple, but it affects all classes. Why is it that Warrior and Guardians are role reversed? What I mean is, in raids, Warriors are the booning support and Guardians are the DPS. Yet, I would consider these roles to be swapped. You can look at this across other classes as well. Do you think ArenaNet meant to balance it this way, or is it because the PvP standpoint balancing? This question is also set with my twin brother that Guardians are better than Warriors. Your opinion? I think that you're being very black and white with what you've said here, really. Like, Guardian, it depends on the spec that the character, these classes, are actually running. Like, it's very common for Guardians to be running hammers and autoing a lot, and to tell you the truth, that is boon support, and it's very potent boon support in the way of giving people tons of protection, right? And that's defensive boon support, while Warriors are yes, boon support, but much more buffing everyone's offensive capabilities. Guardian was marketed more as a defender, a supporter, a protector, right? Rather than an offensive buffer, so maybe it does work. It really is just a question of perspective. As to developer intent, I would say that this game is big enough and complicated enough and scary enough and weird enough that no, a lot of the time, as long as the numbers are roughly in range, a lot of the time they probably have pushed classes to places they didn't quite anticipate. And I think that that's just going to have to go with the territory for having such a complicated combat and role system. And sometimes you'll just have odd things like this. But if you watch my Heart of Thorns review, let me just say I am 100% sympathetic to Guardians for not feeling like they've got quite what was always advertised to them for years and years and years and years and years now. But yeah, hopefully they'll keep pushing it. They'll keep refining it. I have enjoyed the general direction of the balance, even if there have been a bit weird, a few weird and odd aberrations here and there. I have enjoyed the general direction of the balance lately. And hopefully one day we'll see that the game's in a place that feels more sensible and intuitive to you. Moving on, Requiem 403 says, hey WP, I know in the past you have said that you have an aquarium with fish you can take care of. An aquarium is a very grandiose term. Have you considered getting a pet such as a dog or a cat, or do you already have one? Well, so I've grown up my whole life with dogs. Cats, I'm not a cat person. People who have watched my cat videos, you know that about me. I'm really not a cat person. I kind of don't see the point of having a cat. I know that some cats can be friendly. I've also known a lot of vicious, horrible cats. I've also known cats that absolutely stink up the houses and flats and apartments of the people who have them. I just don't really like cats very much. They kill a lot of cute little critters and things that I like to have around in the area. area and in my garden, and I think it would be horrible to come into the kitchen every now and then and see that your cat has murdered this poor delicate little thing. I just don't really like cats. I've never been much of a cat person, but I do like I do like dogs. I like their loyalty. I like the many ways you can interact with dogs and you can train dogs. I like that I feel like you can bond very much with a dog, especially through walking a dog and so forth, and I've just grown up around dogs my whole life. All of that said, do I want a cat or a dog? Probably not. You know, having fish already is enough of a commitment for me, I think. They're long-term commitments and they limit you a lot. Like, if you have dogs and cats and things, it's not so easy to just suddenly move and get up and go different places. Not saying it's impossible, it's just I kind of like the freedom of not having an animal with me. Both of my siblings have ended up getting dogs and cats themselves, and I'm okay alone for now. I think a fish is enough. Fish are just that perfect balance of, yeah, you interact, you enjoy it, it's something you can pursue, and it's kind of a fun thing to look at, but it's not going to be devastating when it goes away, or it's not going to turn out to be, you know, a 15, 16, 17-year-old commitment because your damn old cat just will not move on. But yeah, so there you go. That's kind of my view on pets at the moment. Might be different in a year. Rebecca Moore says, for a Char expansion, what if Lady Althea comes back, leading the Ascalon ghosts in an organized push again, the Char to stop Ritlock from lifting the curse? The other races, like the Ogres and Harpies, would see this as their chance for a land grab. The Flame Legion and Branded could try an assault as well, could be called sins of the past. Interesting spitballing. I think from a lore perspective, there are some barriers there, unfortunately. Like, the ghosts in Ascalon, they're not, like, intelligent necessarily that they'd rally around and fight for their own existence. A lot of the ghosts that are in Ascalon that were triggered by the foe fire are perpetually stuck in the moments they were in before they died, and they're, like, stuck reliving, thinking it's 250 years ago, or, you know, many years ago, and thinking that the original war is still on. They don't appreciate that their circumstances have changed, and so that's not enough, really, for them to band together and fight for their own existence like that. And then also, Lady Althea is not a ghost in the same perspective as a lot of the foe fire ghosts. People who lived and died in Ascalon before the foe fire aren't walking around as ghosts now. They, you know, they were put to rest, and they're still at rest unless they were resurrected or brought back through some other mechanism. And I don't know, the Lady Althea, Barradin, all that kind of stuff, the Rurik relationship, that's all really, really good story and lore to me, and therefore I'd be very scared of them returning to it in Guild Wars 2. But yeah, interesting stuff, interesting name. Probably Sins of the Past is a better name for an expansion revolving around the Char than Cogs of War, which is my favorite for a long time now. Peer Production says, hey WP, you've talked before about how you want to see build templates come into the game, and how you've had some troubles before about guild halls. What if there was a guild hall template system? In other words, what if you could save all the decorations in a hall to be loaded at another time? This could be used for anything from different massive jumping puzzles to festival decorations or even surprise birthday celebrations. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Oh, it would be amazing. It would be a great feature. This is one of those features, though, that it's like, I can imagine being a technical nightmare. Maybe. I don't know, like, could they say, presumably they save the position and orientation of all of the decorations on some level, and maybe, yeah, having templates for that would be cool. If it's not a technical nightmare, I would love them to put that in the game, because, yes, you could hot swap different stuff. Like, right now, we have a theme where we've got all these floating islands in the sky. It could be some of the background footage today's video, actually. That might be fun. And we've got all these different floating islands and things going on, and it's beautiful. But we have to delete that in, you know, next weekend, and it will be gone for good. And that's very sad to think about, right? Also, fairly monetizable feature as well, right? Because you could sell more guild template slots in the gem store for gems. You know, it could be like 400 gems to unlock another template, which you can now save a configuration, another blueprint that you could save things to. I think that'd be great. It would be really, really cool. And it's one of those things that on a big list that would make the decoration system far, far, far more rewarding. So yeah. Xylent says, hey WP, so my question is about the elite areas from Guild Wars 1, such as the Underworld, the Fissure of Woe, the Domain of Anguish, etc. How likely is it for ArenaNet to implement such areas? Do you think they will work as well as 10-man raids, where if you fail an event, your entire party wipes and starts over, plus an entrance fee? Which elite area would you like out of all of those that Guild Wars 1 had? Well, my favorite, I spent the most time in the Domain of Anguish, and I think it is objectively, if we can be objective about such things, probably the best one they ever did. But I have the most nostalgia and happy feelings and thoughts and memories, because I was just getting into it, for Urgo's Warren, which is not really very high on a lot of people's list, but I loved Urgo's. So I think if I was actually presented, which one do you want, WP? We're going to put one in. I think I would pick Urgo's. Ergos could work reasonably well in a raiding format in Guild Wars 2. It would just be like a 7 or 8 encounter long raid. And it would pretty much work, and it would be okay. But stuff like Underworld and Foe are much more like open world maps, as I've explained before. They're of that size, and you can choose a different order to do quests, and you're going to uncover things as you go through. So I don't think they quite work so well as raids, really. There is the other idea of adding the Guild Wars 1 format of Endgame to Guild Wars 2. And I've heard some people saying this. I think that's a bad idea, though. Listen, guys, we've already got a lot of different formats of endgame conflicting with one another. We have dungeons, which some people think, you know, need to be revitalized just because they're in the game. We've got fractals. We've got raids already. We've also got all the other various little aspects of open world. Do we still consider stuff like Triple Trouble a part of endgame? You know, is that a format of endgame? Do they need to add another one and then perpetually be asked by players, you know, years down the line, oh, you got to keep supporting this. You got to keep doing more. I think that could be really dangerous. I think they should double down and really focus on what they've got. Fractals and raids. And potentially there's a little bit of space for dungeons, but mostly fractals and raids. And all the content that they're looking at should sort of mold to those now when we're not dealing with open world stuff. And I think that if you see Underworld, Fissure of Woe, Domain of Anguish, it should be wrapped into one of those formats or open world. And that's just kind of how I feel right now. Destiny's Charm 8095 says, I know I already asked a question, but where is the rest of the Tomb Raider series? I've watched every episode and craving more. Well, I literally just posted the penultimate episode as I record this video. Or not the penultimate, the pre-penultimate episode. What's that? What would that be known as? You've got 2 videos left, and they'll be out by the end of this week, and it's done. And then we'll be moving to Arena. I'm very excited, by the way. Arena I've got very addicted to since I was last talking about it. Very addicted. Moving on, Richard Thompson says, not sure if it's too late for a question. It's absolutely not, Richard. He says, I was just playing a crack in the ice when I came across a Jotun called Thrawn the Lost in the Great Lodge at Holbrack. He tells you stories of the ancient Jotun where they used to be blessed by the gods until the humans turned up and the gods turned it to them as a favored race. Why do you think the gods abandoned the Jotun when Thrawn describes them and the Norn at the same time as being the most advanced races in Tyria? Also, do you think there's a chance the gods could abandon the humans as they did the Jotun? Maybe future expansion pack potential? This character you've just met, I'm really happy you've met. I'm really happy you've spoken to, because he's one of the cooler parts of the Guild Wars 2 world. But he is the best example probably in the entire franchise of an unreliable narrator. What he's saying is at odds and weird and hazy and conflicts with other information we've had from other sources throughout the game, and it's deliberately so. What you're supposed to take away from that character is that history is remembered differently by the people who are retelling it. And that's what you're supposed to take away from him. You're not supposed to, I think anyway, dive into the very specific nitty-gritties of what happened. Just because he said that that's what the gods did doesn't mean that that's necessarily what the gods did. And maybe we will get answers about that now that Balthazar's in the story. That would be one of the coolest things, right? To be able to go up to Balthazar and say, hey, I met a Jotun who said you once favored them. What's going on there? And we can get the real answers from him. But yeah, that's the idea of that guy. Not to give you concrete facts about the past, which we then, you know, dogmatically speculate about. It's to make you see that the past is a hazy and mysterious and nebulous thing. And last but not least, the final question is a very appropriate and funny one, actually, from John Lagoades, who says, when's the next Super Q&A? Well, John, since this one's just been finished, there's another post up on Patreon right now for people to submit to. And I promise, guys, these will be more regular as we go forward. I've got a perfect little time penned out every week for me to start doing these. We'll have a regular Q&A next. But yeah, you guys, if you want to post your own questions, there is a link down in the description right now for you to join up on Patreon. Patreon really does enable me to live my life and do the videos. If you guys have been joining them, if you want to consider it, please do treat this as a little reminder that it does exist. I would be over the moon for anyone who does. And hey, you get to join in on these cool little projects. Hopefully you got some good answers out of this, guys. Hopefully you had a wonderful day, and I will see you for more speculations and fun stuff very, very shortly, just tomorrow. So thanks, guys. Take it easy, and I'll see you soon.